Many thanks for staying tuned. It's still the conversation here on Lagos Television. Today, we intend to take a look at the resumption of the old Port Harcourt Refinery. And for a bit of context, this refinery was built in 1965. And of course, its original capacity was 60,000 barrels per day. And the second arm was added in 1985, bringing the total daily production to 210,000 barrels per day. And so what we have back on track at the moment is the old Port Harcourt Refinery, of course, which is to produce 60,000 barrels per day of PMS as well as other refined products. And we do have a guest in the house this morning whom together we'll take a look at what we intend to gain as a country now that this refinery is back on track, and perhaps how much we need to start holding on to government to ensure that the second leg of the refinery, which will bring the daily capacity to 10,000, is handed down on time. And we do have Jide Pratt, COO Aona, and Country Manager Trade Grid in the studio this morning. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for talking to me.
Right, so let's start this way. What we do have back on track now is the old Port Harcourt Refinery. And of course, it's to be churning out 60,000 barrels per day of PMS, as we all know, as well as other products. But then what we should actually be seeing at the moment is what we were promised, 210,000 barrels per day. What has happened? Or in your own opinion, what do you think has happened? And does this really call for celebration?
So let me start by saying that, and like you rightly said, the input capacity of those two refineries together is 210,000 barrels a day. So that's the input.
Right.
So when you refine petroleum products, the aim is to feed a refinery with crude and then get what you call distillate. So the output from that refinery will be petrol, PMS, gas oil, which is AGO, kerosene,
right,
which is HHK, and some LPG.
Is that where you also get jet fuel?
Yes, and jet fuel as well. Now, every time a refinery cracks up, and you're so apt at saying that there are two parts of this refinery. So when it was initially built in the 50s, they built just a 60,000 capacity in terms of what it can take in terms of crude. By 1989, they went ahead and added 150,000. So what has been revamped now that has been brought back online, first and foremost, is the 60,000 barrel capacity part of the refinery.
Okay.
If you read the initial contract when the turnaround was signed in 2021, it spoke to the fact that they would ramp up in terms of revamping. 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, and 44 months. So the aim was that by the end of the 44 months, ideally, that refinery should be up and running as 210,000 barrels per day.
Okay.
And it should be 90% capacity.
Right.
What they've done now is, and if you notice, the goalposts had been shifted so many times.
Many times.
Is it a cause for celebration? Maybe yes and no. And the yes, because finally it's been done. A lot of milestones have been passed. But what it does mean is that every day, the way it is, 1.4 million liters of petrol will come out. 900,000 liters of kerosene will come out. 1.5 million liters of gas oil, which is AGO, will come out.
Right.
And about, I believe, 2 million liters of LPFO, if my memory serves. LPFO is fuel oil.
Fuel, okay.
So that's where we are.
Okay, at the moment, that's where we are. And so yesterday, a lot of Nigerians had also imagined or thought that now that this one part of the refinery was back on track, then it should be some kind of cherry news and that they probably should sell lower than what the Dangote refinery, which is a private facility, is selling. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Why is that?
So two things. It's a misconception to think that once you refine locally, the prices will be lower.
Okay.
And let's take it from two ends. The 60,000 refinery is an old refinery. So what it does mean in terms of refinery efficiency, she doesn't have it.
Okay.
Now, if you have a new refinery, in terms of refinery efficiency, you have it. However, you have a huge capital expenditure, capex, which you must amortize over time. The Dangote refinery, for instance, could be able to get you the best blend because she's new and efficient.
Okay.
Look at the 60,000 capacity refinery. If you read the NNPC statement, I think her second statement spoke to the fact that they would blend. So what it means is that the refinery's capacity or efficiency is able to bring out what you call naphtha.
Right.
Naphtha is basically in raw form. The best way to put it is raw PMS. Now, it needs to be blended to get to optimal, or let me say, on specification product.
Okay.
So two things are going to happen. They're going to import petroleum products, PMS, and then blend with naphtha. And let's be clear, blending is not an illegal. It's just to be sure that whatever you blend, in terms of test standards,
Right.
is correct.
Okay.
So, in imports, if you imported a cargo and if you refined, one advantage you would have is freight. So
Okay.
let's go back to that pricing. Ideally, if you refine locally, you save up to 15 to 20% in terms of freight cost.
Okay.
So that ideally, if you put it back in terms of prices in Naira per liter, then ideally it should be cheaper by that amount.
Right.
However, there are also two things that are extremely important. The cost of crude oil per barrel, whether it's sold in Naira or not, the cost of crude oil, and then the exchange rate. So if we're having these conversations around prices today, and look at it that if the exchange rate was 900, it's a totally different conversation.
Right.
When the Port Harcourt refinery came on stream yesterday, or was it day before
Day before yesterday.
the price on the portal for NNPC for Port Harcourt was 1,049. So it goes to say that the refinery is back up, but the pricing wasn't. They went ahead and I believe yesterday it was moved to 1029.
Right. There was a drop.
There was a drop. But the point is that it's still not as quote and unquote cheap as people would expect.
Right.
But these are the reasons why it's not.
Right, but is this also able to foster some kind of competition? Like a lot of Nigerians are also envisaging that now that the old Port Harcourt refinery is back on track, and then you still have that of Dangote refinery, and then there is a free market like we've been made to believe. Is this also able to drive some kind of competition at the moment? Because again, if between the other day and yesterday we had a price shift of about 20 naira from the NNPCL. Remember last weekend, the Dangote refinery had also dropped 20 naira for the marketers. And so now that this is back on track, is it able to change the dynamics for the business tycoon, Dangote?
For me, no, and not yet.
Okay.
So put it in perspective. If we do from the Port Harcourt refinery 60,000 nameplate refinery, if they bring out 1.4 million liters a day, if we say Nigeria's consumption, and I mean this needs to be confirmed, is 50 million liters, what it does mean is that is just about 2.4, about 2.6% of the total daily supply of PMS.
So it's not
Significant.
Not there, okay?
So assume that the 210 capacity is back on stream. Then what that means is that you're moving 3 times that. You're moving to near 10%. So what needs to happen to drive competition is that there needs to be a healthy mix.
Right.
Between refineries working, so maybe refinery Warri is back on, maybe Kaduna is back on. Maybe the modular refineries that decide to get catalytic crackers in and want to do PMS at regional level. Volumes is what will drive competition.
Okay.
Let's be clear. The largest single train refinery in the world is the Dangote refinery. At 650,000
Barrels per day.
It's not a case of competition. It's a case of they're always going to be 2 steps ahead. That's what it is. But let's be clear. It's not a bad thing. If the premium products are coming out and he's able to, and we look at it, the refinery has been able to kind of drop prices when they need to, step it up when they need
to.
So the mix for competition gets better if more refineries are on ground.
Right. So again, I remember that you also did mention here blending and refining. I think there's also a bit of confusion on the part of Nigerians who are not sure whether the Port Harcourt refinery is only blending or refining, although the NNPCL in its release has said, of course, mentioned issues around blending, the naphtha, which you mentioned, and also saying that at the moment the refinery is producing about 4 or 5 products, refining. So can you please break it down? When you say blending, is this another form of refining, or are they 2 different things entirely?
Okay, so there are 2 different things in one bucket.
Okay.
When you refine petroleum products in a refinery, what you're doing is that you're putting it in a distillation unit.
Right.
And you're applying heat to crude.
Okay.
So it means at various different temperatures, fractional distillation, like they would say, different product lines are going to come out. And that means that at different heat and temperature, different products will be produced.
Okay.
That is a refining process.
Right.
If you want to blend this, it's mixing two different things together in the right
get a product.
proportion.
Okay.
Now, if I wanted to cook soup and it was very thick, then I could put water into it to make it lighter. It doesn't kill the fact that it is soup,
Right.
but I don't want
It's
a
just the
thick
texture.
paste. It's now the texture.
Okay.
So in blending, naphtha is straight cut. Let's assume it's raw form PMS.
Right.
But to be able to achieve maybe the density, anything I need, then it means that I can add petrol,
Okay.
which I've already refined or imported, and add to it. That's not the problem. So that's the blending. It's a mix.
Okay. So as it stands with the Port Harcourt Refinery, which of the two do we have, or are we still importing, or are we do we have in abundance the naphtha or the PMS?
So-
or the PMS.
So it's the PMS that we're importing.
So we're still importing
We're still
but then
importing
we are
PMS because
refining
you're going to
naphtha.
mix it. So we are doing what you call straight cut, which is
Okay.
naphtha.
Okay.
So that refinery as is able to produce naphtha.
Right.
And then we import PMS to be able to blend.
Okay, and then when we blend both, that is what we now get into at the filling stations to buy
Yes, PMS.
as
PMS,
PMS.
yes.
Okay. All right, so now we still have a shortfall of other refineries in the country. Even the old Port Harcourt still has one other end that is still not working.
Correct.
And then Mr. President is hopeful that the three other refineries or two other refineries as well as other modular refineries are also able to work. But you also did mention that what's the biggest challenge why the modular refineries are finding it difficult to meet up to expectations?
It's very simple, crude oil. Every refinery thrives on the fact that their input item has to be crude oil.
Okay.
So think about it this way. If optimally we say that Nigeria can produce 2.2 million barrels a day of crude oil, but she's just currently at about 1.4 or 1.5, that means there's a shortfall.
Right.
So there are two things that come to compete for that. Feeding the refineries, that's number one. And then the second thing is that revenue for the Federation account. Because once you sell crude oil, you get foreign exchange.
Okay.
So the question is, at what, and you have something called the domestic crude supply obligation. For the 9 or 10 years that NNPC was the sole importer, it meant that every time we got crude, we had what you call the DSDP arrangement, direct sales, direct purchase.
Okay.
So we'd export the crude and import refined petroleum products as a swap.
Okay.
Now, so what it is today that if those volumes that we're able to bring out from the ground are reducing, then there's pressure on supplying to both the modular refineries, the Dangote refinery, and as well as revenue issues. So the single greatest problem, in my opinion, we need to get to 2 million barrels at least.
But at the moment, we've been promised that 2 million, maybe 2025, the current refinery should take us to, even though at the moment it's about 1.9, 1.4, 1.5.
Yes,
so as it is at the moment, judging from what we see on ground at the moment, are you convinced that we're able to get to that projection in another year?
In my opinion, no. I think we would get to about 1.8. And I mean, it's really clear if you look at what is happening today. Some new oil finds, some people have moved from offshore to shallow. Companies like Owando are involved in some transactions. So you hear 35. I mean, look at between October, or I believe September, October, we increased by 35,000 barrels. I'm not so sure that being able to move from 1.5 today to 2 million in a year is achievable.
Okay.
I think it's a long shot. I think at worst, if we get to 1.8 and we're constant about being on 1.8, in my opinion, that is where we'll get to. I believe going into end of 2025, Q1 2026, we can begin to look at 2 million liters.
Okay, right. So with that in mind and looking at the fact that probably poor maintenance culture was one of the things that took us to now grounding most of our refineries, and now we do have this on board. How do we ensure that we do not suffer the same fate, especially where aging infrastructure seems to be the order of the day?
I think for me, and in my personal opinion, one of the things that we need to do is that we need to be clear about what refineries need to stay and which need to go. So if a refinery is not optimal anymore, it's gotten to its best by date. If you revamp it, the efficiency levels are still not going to be high in some cases.
Right.
So the NNPC needs to sit down and cherry pick. Do I need new funds to come in, private sector participation? Do I need to let go of this total refinery and just let it go? And why is that? Because every time a new refinery comes on board, it's going to be more efficient, and you can't compete with it the older you get.
Right.
So at a certain period, do we want to sell off the old? Do we want private sector investment where we begin to convert to these refineries and say, okay, this will be good for maybe just gas oil? Do we need to enhance modular refineries that can afford to put in an RFCC and say that, okay, I'm not just going to do AGO, I'm going to do PMS as well.
Okay.
Don't forget, if they do PMS, Port Harcourt Refinery gets to 210 and does PMS, it means that the first thing is that in that supply chain, there's a quicker turnaround in terms of product availability in that area. The more they can refine, then it now begins to get to the competition level we mentioned.
Right.
So I think that there's the for, there's the against, but for me, I look at it as a balance sheet item. Is this asset got into its best by date? How much can I squeeze out in terms of efficiencies if I enhance it?
So some have also said government has no business running refineries. Is this where now you've said government needs to cherry pick and then look at your options and then decide whether or not we had from our president Olusegun Obasanjo who had thought, okay, the best bet was to sell off these refineries, but again after a rethink, now we're back to government again keeping these refineries and revamping them. So what's the best option? Looking at what other countries of the world are also doing at the moment, who are also into the business of crude exportation, what's the best bet, or is it a one-size-fits-all where governments decide that, okay, we also want to be players in this industry, or we just want to be regulators and allow for the private sector to be fully involved?
I think it's a mix of both, and it's an important thing you said when you mentioned other countries. Saudi Aramco runs their oil and gas sector, and they're basically one of the most profitable in the world. But that's not the end to it. You can decide as government to run your refineries, but you must do it on the highest corporate governance standards. If that is not happening, then you need to pull out.
Okay.
There's no gain saying that you want to run it and say it's a national security issue, but at the same time, you're not running it well.
Okay.
So if you can run it, get on the stock exchange if you need to get on the stock exchange, list. But sadly, the route to listing on the stock exchange is still corporate governance.
Right.
And if you fail for so long, then the question is that reduce your equity stake. You can still be a player,
and then
but
allow
you're just not a
others.
major, and let others run it. The Nigerian LNG is a typical example. It runs brilliantly well.
Right.
There's a government participation, there's a private sector. But we've been able to find the mix that allows that company thrive, give profits, and return to shareholders.
Yeah, but one would have thought also with the signing of the PIA, things would have been better now that you've mentioned the Nigeria NLG as a case study here. So one would have thought that with the PIA, the downstream sector would also take a cue from that and begin to allow heavy participation from the private sector.
Sadly, it hasn't. First, it took us, 12 years to get the PIB into a PIA. But signing the laws and signing, contracts isn't the greatest problem in Nigeria. It's implementation.
Right.
And we found out that we've constantly failed in implementing. So if look at the PIA, for instance, signatures, approvals, you're still looking at situations where it is still difficult to get approvals in Nigeria, even though the law states this is what should be done within this timeline. Now, so between the NURP, Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, and the NMDPRA, it's being able to put those laws into a bucket and say, what are the things that are impeding getting this SLA as at this time?
Okay.
But what is worse is that while we dilly-dally on things like this, capital will always chase returns. So it meant that if someone came in with $10 million today, and says, I've been here for 6 months, I can't get around red tape, even though there's a PIA in place. Let me go and try Gabon. Let me go and try Angola. Let me go and try Uganda. It means that that capital will leave.
Right.
If that capital leaves, then rig count begins to continue to decline.
Yeah, so if this is an issue, and then which means the government is not serious about ease of doing business and then asking investors to come into Nigeria and promising return on investment if issues are still around the implementation of the PIA. So how then do we get past this bottleneck?
I think the very, very easy way to do this is that the government needs to be a bit more, I'll use the word transparent and open.
Okay.
So we hear a lot of things in Nigeria where we say, we're going to do, we're implementing. A verb is a doing word. And
So
that's the simple way.
Okay.
If you look at it and say, I'm going to get to 1.2, 1.3, 1.9 million. And in the month of January, this is how much we're going to bring on. These are the two things that we're going to do to make sure it happens. And then hold whoever is responsible accountable. Right. If that does not happen, we're just going to keep on talking about things. And sadly, those deadlines will not be measured. They won't be shown publicly. I mean, and you need to be able to click on a website for an agency and say, what has happened over this? Data in Nigeria is poor. Right. You go to the NMDPRA website today, you'd see truck out, you'd see stock for August 2023.
And when November 2024.
I mean, it's unacceptable. And these are the things that need to change so that everybody is focused. And when the world sees you're focused on timelines, you're focused on implementation, they will give you more time.
All right. So is corruption still a big issue?
It's never going to go away, in my opinion. Where there's chaos, there's gain. Where people do things and there's no reprimand. If I can get away with murder and that's what happens, then there's an incentive to continue to do it.
Okay.
So until we have institutions that are larger than individuals, we have agencies that do their job not because the president says so, but because it is their duty to do, everybody falls into line.
Right.
I ask a question and I say that if you went to Ghana, the same bus driver that would drive against traffic in Lagos won't drive against traffic in Ghana.
Right.
Why? Because the laws are there and they're being followed.
Active.
It's really as simple as
right. So a lot of people also have also linked issues around pipeline vandalization and crude oil theft as one of the two biggest issues that the sector is still facing. In your opinion, do you think it's as big as people say?
I believe it is. And going back to what we said about data, we don't have enough data. So you'd even find out that sometimes the pipeline vandalization and what is lost is more than we think. Because we're just seeing the ones that we see. Right. So we're able to quantify. What are the ones we can't quantify?
Okay.
Line tracing, heat tracing, data, drone management. There's so many ways to monitor pipelines. But the question is that, are the pipelines too large an exercise for the government to monitor? If that is the issue, then I mean, begin to look at how to privatize it as well. Bring in data, bring in technology. But it means that if someone is responsible for 500 kilometers, that person is going to invest. He's going to earn a right of way or throughput. So that way it's monitored the right way. Because this is the resource that gives us the best in terms of revenue. We need to protect it better.
Is there a role that the global, because again, we understand that issues around crude, issues around oil is a global trade. And yes, Nigeria is a player, but are there roles that other international communities do play when it comes to discussions around the sector?
I mean, OPEC is the melting pot for discussion around the sector. So one of the things that you get from OPEC is that anytime you need month-to-month data, there's a cooperation among member states.
Okay.
OPEC Plus is also in OPEC, but in my opinion, have a different agenda to try and keep crude oil prices up. So these conversations happen. But you see, there's a global perspective for everything. But at the same time, there's a Nigerian perspective to solve a Nigerian problem.
Right.
So while we have benefit of hindsight, best practice from global oil and gas companies, solving Nigeria's problem is really local. And I think we need to focus on how we solve it and just take best practices from OPEC.
Right. So let's also quickly look at the role of the NNPCL in all of this. And a lot of people sometimes, and I know you talked about trust issues earlier on and say that government needs to also be more open and be more transparent when it comes to dealing with issues like this. And so with exploration and production, in the upstream sector, which the NNPCL plays a pivotal role. How would you rate the crucial role that NNPCL plays in that sector?
Rating it, I mean, it's difficult. Why
This
do I
probably
say
will
so?
be your own personal perspective.
This is my personal perspective. I think that the NNPC, let me say, has done two. I'm just being abstract here. She should be at 6 or 7.
Okay.
You hold a capital, you hold a national asset, and you've held it for so long. Let's be clear, it's not the mines that are not in the NNPC. The best mines in the oil and gas sector, believe it or not, are in the NNPC. Now, there seems to be a conflict between doing what is right and what my Oga says I should do. So it means that it can be better managed. Look at things like gas. Recently, you noticed she signed a 10-year contract with the Dangote refinery for gas provision. These are the things the NNPC needs to try and go and sort out.
Okay.
We have more gas in Nigeria than we have oil. We're sitting on 207 trillion scoff of gas.
And we keep flaring.
We're flaring. So what it means is that finding ways around commercializing gas, finding ways of enhancing crude oil production, signing long-term gas contracts. But to do this, back to what we said, we've talked about trust deficit, you need to have a proper board structure. NNPC today is owned by MOFI, Ministry of Finance Incorporated, and Ministry of Petroleum Resources. We need to bring in more players into that sector.
Okay.
They need to be driven by corporate governance so that they do much better. And they can do much better.
Right.
2 years ago, or was it last year, there was no contribution from the NNPC to the Federation
account.
I mean, these things are unacceptable. There are challenges, yes, but that's why you get best minds to go and solve problems.
Right.
You don't get best minds to tell you this is the problem. So get on the stock exchange. Better openness and probity. The easiest way you're going to do that is getting on the Nigerian Stock Exchange.
Okay.
Do you need to let go of some of what you own? Free equity. If you free in equity, cash comes in into the country. But it also means that investment comes in.
Right.
Don't just say, I will do. Let it become a litmus test so that when capital flight is leaving anywhere, it's actually leaving places like Angola and coming to Nigeria. Set deadlines and timelines that are measurable. But you can't measure it on yourself and say that this is what we've done. No. Enough of the bland statements. Let's get critical in terms of number and let's begin to drive data.
Right. So with this refinery on board now, can Nigerians probably go to sleep and be rest assured that the era of fuel scarcity may be over?
I think the era of fuel scarcity, and I'm not going to say from this refinery, I'm going to say from the Dangote refinery.
Okay.
As long as crude is fed into the refinery, I do not believe we should have issues in terms of scarcity.
Okay.
Pricing is different. What the Port Harcourt refinery, and let's be clear, will do is that for the immediate environment around Port Harcourt,
Which they serve.
the more they refine, the more they have. Today is 1.4 million.
Yeah, and they push out.
And they push out. Once you push it out, the pricing is another thing. But once you push it out, it means that products are available. Let's also not forget, people still import into Port Harcourt.
Right.
If they do that and the landing cost is not too far, but then it means that the issues of supply chain, the issues of enhanced wait time for shipping reduces. If you brought in a cargo from abroad, you'd probably be doing 14 days if you went in from Europe. If you went into Lome, maybe about 3-4 days. But I mean, from the refineries, it's same day.
Okay.
So I do believe the issues around product scarcities are behind us.
Okay.
But to do this, it means that these refineries that are opened must keep working.
Right. Because again, you also did mention that pricing is another thing. And then we can't wish away the fact that pricing will always be a problem. Yeah. And so the sellers, that's what are they called now? The independent marketers, what role do they play here? Because again, if they are getting from NNPCL and they're also getting from Dangote, and do they still have a say when it comes to pricing and what the pump price they intend to sell, since it is now a free market?
I mean, free market, but let's be clear. Ipman, Meman, Dapma, Petron are what you call distributors. They're marketers, but they're the distributors. What it means is that if you look at the combination of stations they have, probably over 35,000. So the play is this: if they decide that, look, I'm going to go low in terms of my margin expectations and incentivize by selling more volume, then it means that once they've bought and what they add on. They're going to add transportation to get to the retail station. But there is a margin as well. But don't forget that they all do this based on how much the cost of funding is. Right. So if I'm borrowing at 35%, while I might have good intentions in terms of reducing my price, the truth of the matter is that the bank is going to come knocking when the bank is going to come knocking. So it means in that space, Petro1, Moman, and everything, they can help to distribute the product. But I think two things that are fundamental is cost of funds. Right. That affects their business. And if you look at the margins in downstream, I keep on telling people it's very low. So it's a volume-driven game. Right. It's not a margin-driven game. Then things around the fiscal policies, around fiscal and monetary policies, if the exchange rate, I can't say this enough, was at 800, 900. So the exchange rate remains the biggest factor. Yes. Before we allow you to go, oftentimes the NNPCL is always, when there's an issue, they will be quick to say that we would always ensure that Nigerians have access to petroleum products. And so in terms of energy security for the future, what do you think the NNPCL needs to ensure at the moment, and ensuring that at least there's always the product available to Nigerians? I think the NNPC's greatest task should be how to generate revenue for the nation. Okay. She's got partners in different things she can work with. So look at it, we're talking about refineries. A refinery is a partner. While they can play in it, they can also encourage, local and private sector to participate in that space. Crude oil feed. They need to ensure refining continues to happen by making sure modular refineries, big refineries, every refinery that needs crude and can pay for it should be able to get it. Right. That's another thing. They need to commercialize gas more. Okay. That is to increase revenue back into the sport. Because once these things happen, the more money you have, the more money you can spend. Right. Then profligacy at the government hand needs to reduce. We don't need to be... We can't spend money like we're still a rich nation. Right. We need to be clear about what we need to spend and then put in expenditure into things that will produce. And I think that for me is what it is. All right, so we need to let you go this morning. Thank you so much, Jide Pratt, CEO, Aona, and Country Manager, Trade Grade. Thank you so much for finding time to be here on the program today. We appreciate your thought. All right, we've taken, of course, an extensive comment with our guests in the studio this morning, and I do hope that the NNPC will take all of the suggestions that, of course, he's offered this morning. The priority of Nigerians will be to ensure that there's always stability in that sector. You buy what you want to buy. Adebimpe, you continue to buy the liters that you can buy, Abi. Irrespective of how much it is, let the products, let it be available. We'll take a quick break. The program returns shortly.